Hello everyone, thank you very much for coming to the new BIM Talk. We will have an amazing agenda and amazing guest today. We will talking about Arcadis, we will talk about Francois, and there will be lots of interesting things that we will talk about the BIM development and lots of interesting information and methodology as well as technical aspects of BIM. So today's agenda will look like more on where we will be discussing about large scale companies on the agenda side, and then we will be talking about the business transformation on the business transformation side, and then we will talking about the people management and people side of the BIM. Then we will be talking about digital twins, because this is also an interesting topic, and where Francois will explain how people are, really discussing digital twins without knowing what is it, and there will be some interesting aspects from his perspective. And we will be talking about international experience when it comes to BIM, especially as I said, large scale and small scale companies. So this will be one of the core things, because when the companies are smaller scale, it's different approach and different techniques we use. But when we talk about large scale companies, we really talk about Arcadis, 24,000 employees or more, and across the globe, and how you really manage and how you really implement BIM on that scale. And then we will talk about career advice. So you will see from his point of view, because he's most probably receiving so many CVs and seeing how to incorporate different colleagues on their teams. So this is really important to see from the management side how they're really seeing what things you have to have in your portfolio or in your CV. And lastly, we will see also practical, and there will be practical aspects of BIM and a great Q&A session. So let's give a little intro to Francois Appere. And Appere, I'm sorry again, I'm always misspelling this, but obviously he will excuse me and he will tell it his name more spelled in French properly. So he is right now leading a BIM in North America of Arcadis, and he have been practicing in France as well. And he also did some, he's most of the time in the media and giving some information about the Arcadis, how they're pushing the BIM and at the high level and the low level, and then they are pulling up, the different speakers, and Appere is one of the speakers in those talks on behalf of Arcadis. So I would like to show you about a minute or so a video about the Arcadis.
In the future, everything we do, every decision we make should be data driven. Arcadis North America is more than 100 offices. The standard common data environment today within Arcadis is BIM 360.
On the Toledo project, it first started with that do not drink order. The city hired Arcadis to have them back on the drinking water as soon as possible. We work closely with the city at each submittal, making sure that we closely address anything, and that they were reviewing along the whole process. For me, the concept Stronger Together has really proven itself in working in the cloud. Utilizing the cloud allowed us to interact instantaneously, consistently, and actually improve on the design. The project's better, the deliverables are better. Being able to host everything there was able to save 1,000 hours and probably more. The risk assessment is reduced because there's less conflicts. We reduced the RFIs and change orders.
Having those 3D models helped in the communication process, both for us and for our clients. Being able to use Revit with all the different disciplines, architectural, structural, MEP, HVAC, being able to leverage tools like Civil 3D and Navisworks. We could run clash detection automatically in the cloud. In terms of efficiency, that's a tremendous advantage. We have multiple users working in different pieces of the same model at the same time. That's really game-changing. We really want to focus on resilient solutions for our clients, and water infrastructure is critical for the resiliency of a city in the future.
So now I will be welcoming Francois here. Welcome, Francois. Thank you very much for joining our BIM Talk. We are really excited to hear these different points from the agenda. So again, welcome, and I'm giving the word to you.
Thanks for having me, Hassan. Thank you.
So can you introduce a little bit about yourself, because I just did it very briefly?
My name Francois Appere. I am a civil engineer as background. I've started in France to work for Arcadis almost 10 years ago as a bridge designer. And quite quickly in my career, I had the opportunity to learn about BIM and BIM management. And I transitioned to a full-time BIM implementation manager for Arcadis France back in 2015. I did that for a couple of years, and then I had the opportunity to move to the US, and I'm now the BIM lead, as you said, for Arcadis North America, and I'm based out there on the west in California.
Absolutely. That is, I mean, we had a little bit talk prior to this meeting. So can you tell a little bit more about your role, that you are more on the management side of it, like on the corporate side of the Arcadis? So a little bit more so people understand that, like your background and exactly what aspects you're tackling of BIM and at what level. So can you mention a little bit on that?
Sure. So just to give you an idea, Arcadis North America, that's more than 6,000 people, 6,000 colleagues. So that's pretty large organization, and we have three main business areas, which are the environment, the water, and the infrastructure. And I do not sit in any of those business areas. I sit more on the corporate side, and I really act as an advisor for those business lines, because we do believe that BIM implementation is a business transformation and needs to be owned by the business. If you just have some IT staff trying to push for BIM, you will not be successful. So that's really my job, to sit outside of all the business of any business and to be there to advise the business leaders on the best way to move with this BIM implementation. Because of course, depending on the sector and the industry, the BIM maturity is not the same, so the approach will not be the same either. So yeah, that's where I sit, kind of in between the corporate world and the operational world.
Absolutely, you're right. And I mean, I think you nailed it, because most of the businesses focus on like BIM teams, or, like getting the BIM department on board. But if you really think about it, if you have a separate BIM department, it becomes more fragmented. And what you're doing is you're looking at the business value from the corporate level. So you have like you're advising the corporate on the right decisions for the individual teams, and you're incorporating and injecting BIM skills in those teams to deliver what they have to deliver and collaborate with the information, and you're assisting it day-to-day basis, those teams, because you know exactly what corporate like level is expecting things, and which is totally different than the expectations of individual teams. So this is really great, and I would like to discuss a little bit about because from our experience, we work rather like with contractors and smaller scale projects, but when it comes to large scale projects and large scale teams, so can you a little bit explain how difficult it is to manage large scale teams, or what are the techniques or different methodologies you use to like distribute the communication and collaboration?
Yeah, I would say that first, when I moved here to the US a bit more than 3 years ago, of course, that's a bit overwhelming. You have so many staff scattered in so many different offices, more than 100 offices across the US. And that's kind of a challenge to know where you stand. So we really started by doing kind of a capabilities matrix to be able to run that gap analysis and to see where we stand today. It was important to have an idea of how many people are good at using some BIM authoring softwares, how many people could do BIM coordination or BIM management, how many client facing people are good enough to speak about BIM to clients externally. Can we trust them? Can we trust the message they deliver? So that took some time to really go around those main teams, and traveling quite a lot at that time to meet the people and to try to get a sense of where we stand. And to be honest with you, I think that's the case on most of the big corporations, is that you have some pockets of excellence here and there. You have some offices that are really good because they have experience with it. They have done some BIM projects in the past, and sometimes the rest of the country is not that mature. So then the challenge is really to create a community and to connect those people together and to create some bonds and to create some network and to help people create a network. And as you said, sitting on the corporate level, you sit back and you are not in any business. So then it gives you the flexibility to speak to anyone within the company and then to say, oh, you're looking for something, some advice on that front. Maybe you should connect with this person in Florida. even if you sit in Texas, because you will be able to, help each other, even if you do not sit in the same team, on a daily basis. And we do not have, as you said, a BIM team. I think BIM is here to break those silos that the construction industry has for years. So if we create a BIM team, we will just create another silo. So that will be just nonsense. So it's really important for me to just say, okay, you have your designers, you have your team who are working very well in CAD and before that in a paper-based environment. And what we do is just upskill your people, and we just upskill them with the right skills depending on their role on the project. So it's super important to have, I think for me, that capability matrix, that gap analysis, and then to have a common framework when it comes to roles and responsibilities, to know where, who should be trained to what skills, soft skills and hard skills, depending on their role on projects.
Absolutely. I mean, you just, as I said, when you have at a corporate level, you explain it how, beneficial it becomes to the entire corporate. Especially if you don't have BIM managers at the corporate level, then the decision-taking process is so much different and expectations are so much unrealistic and different, and they don't really focus on getting the maximum value from the BIM side. So here it is, you just expressed how important it is to bring a BIM manager at a corporate level, at the business level, so to bring more value to the business. And when we talk about a multitude of a large scale projects and large scale, company, so what kind of issues you are facing when it comes to BIM, and maybe some, techniques that you have been using to handle those issues?
Yeah, so I would say that I can really more speak on the large scale, organization level more than maybe the project level, especially when it comes to implementing. And I think that you touch a good point when it comes to being part of the corporate, because that's where you discuss the budgets, and when it comes to training people, you need budget and you need cash. So of course that's important to be able to tell them, okay, you have certain amount of money, so I will help you make sure that we invest that amount of money at the right time to the right people. And to build on what you said, I think that's really around communication. Because when it comes, large scale, as you said, you have hundreds of colleagues. How do you communicate the same message on a consistent basis to all those staff? And how do you make sure that this message goes through? And for me, that's continuous education. I do a lot of presentations and training, and not only to our BIM practitioners, because, I remember having some discussions where you have people, they think that we should train everyone to Revit and we will be the best company in BIM, if everyone can use Revit. I'm like, that's just nonsense. It doesn't make any sense. You're not going to ask a project manager to work in Revit. So then that's where I like to focus more on the non-BIM practitioners, because even if you do not use a BIM authoring software on a daily basis, you are still involved in a project that lives in a BIM environment. So you need to know the basics of it. So that's really, for me, continuous education, trying to make it simple so people understand the basics of it. They are not supposed to all become BIM managers, but really sharing the principles and having a clear message around what is BIM and why, as a company, we decide to go for it is super important. So again, finding ways to communicate.
Absolutely. You just said one of very important keyword, which is continuous learning and continuous improvement. And that's actually one of the lean concepts of TPS, right? Toyota Production Systems. So where, they figured out the lean manufacturing methods, and one of the core thing was constant improvement. And when you focus on the constant improvement, obviously you constantly develop and improve at the company level. But there's one more aspect which you said it's very important. You said that using Revit would push you in the first line, which is, like you just said, it's not true, because BIM has multitude of layers, right? We're always talking about it. It has, different phases, and one of the phases is tools. Yes, but the tools there are BIM authoring tools, but there are lots of other tools that is incorporated into that. But there's also a process involved in it, how you use those tools, and the actual process and collaboration thing. And then there is a management and policy level, right? So how you are doing it based on the standards, soft landings, and all all the other aspects in order to manage your BIM output. And from BIM Pure, I can see that there's one interesting question. We just actually discussed this question prior to the coming to the BIM Live, and this is the question about what is the difference between the BIM in France and the workflow in France and in comparison to the US. So when you switched, what kind of cultural shock or differences you faced with? So can you illustrate a little bit on those aspects?
I will say that first, the good thing with BIM is that, and at least the good thing, at least within the company, is that we have some standards on the tooling side and the technology side. So I was really, familiar with for example, the Autodesk ecosystem and the Bentley ecosystem. And in fact, we are using the same tools in the US when we compare France to the US. And we said, okay, how to manage an implementation on a large scale? I think most of it comes with standardization. So you want to have some level of standardization so that cultural barrier you could face between countries is a bit less thanks to the standard framework you provide with the technology. So I will say that on that front, Revit is maybe Revit in French and Revit in American, but that's Revit at the end of the day. So on that front, that's the same thing. Then how do you manage a project? How do you approach the client relationship, and how do you approach innovation? I would say, yeah, here is different. I remember spending a lot of time in France before having the buy-in from the leadership in demonstrating the value, coming with very robust maybe business plans and trying to convince all the stakeholders one by one, where when I came to the US presenting the BIM concept and what you can get from it, I was really feeling that people were like, oh yeah, that sounds great, let's do it. And that was really like, okay, we do it, but if you do not have return on investment in the 6 months, then you're done. Then you're like, okay, didn't work, so we'll try something else and something new. And so I think that's this culture of trying fast and failing fast, and that's okay to fail. That's okay. You need to be agile, especially today in this digital and new technology world. Things are moving so fast, so it makes sense to try and to fail and to try again until you are successful and you find the right balance. So I think that was for me the biggest change, where I was presenting something to some leaders in the US, and I was like, oh yeah, you're on board, okay. But then you have a level of expectation which is maybe a bit higher, and you need to make sure that you have the proper support to your team so you make it happen. Otherwise you have some troubles too, which makes sense.
Absolutely. What you just said, level of expectations can be, very unrealistic. And when you lose, or when you don't, control that level of expectations, you can lose trust, and which is a huge enemy, the biggest enemy, I would say, to BIM. When you lose the trust of the investors or stakeholders, you suddenly don't have anyone to hold on and to say you go ahead and push forward with the BIM, and which is a different culture. And in one of my studies, when I was studying and publishing one publication, I was studying between the differences of US and UK market and the differences in the marketplace, which actually we just discussed again this on briefly. When we talk about the US market, we are talking about that the clients or employers are more trusting and holding on the stakeholders, like these would be general contractor, architect, and the project managers. This is based on the survey of the participants from the US. And from UK, it's suddenly changing, and most of the people are relying on the actual client employer. So they want that employer to be incorporated, and they had least trust, one of the least trust actually, to project managers, which was very strange. And they have their vision totally different, and I can understand it because of the market and because of market space. So did you have something like this in your practice? Did you experience something like that project managers were more holding the ropes in the US industry, or it was a general contractor in comparison to the France?
I'm not sure I've seen exactly those things, but I think that depending on the sector and depending on the area within the US, things change a lot.
Absolutely.
I moved to the United States, but what I've discovered is that there are many states. and sometimes they are not that united or aligned when it comes to those practices. And I see a big difference, for example, between the East Coast and the West Coast. I told you that we within Arcadis we work a lot for water utilities, so we work a lot for the public sector. And the public sector in the US, that's like in many sectors in the world, in many public sectors in the world, sometimes they have maybe less investments, so they are a bit behind when it comes to digital maturity. And what I see between our practices in the West Coast and the East Coast is that some of our clients are a bit more mature on the West Coast and will be willing to to have BIM included in their project, and that's part of the client's request for many years. So on that side, we are a bit more advanced, and indeed in that on that side of the country, maybe the project managers have a better knowledge on what we can expect from the new technology, what the client is expecting. And I know that on those projects we work a lot for contractors too. So here, yeah, the dynamic of the team is not the same as on the East Coast, and again, it's different from Europe. So what I've seen is that, in fact, yeah, we at the end of the day we deliver a design, we build some assets, but it varies so much between the type of client, the type of market, and the location in the country and outside of the country. So yeah, hard to tell for me between the US and the UK, because I already got more experience from France and the US. And as I told you, now in the US I'm not directly involved in the projects but more on the implementation side. So it's kind of different perspectives, and trying to bring that together to make what I do on a daily basis, and try to make the right decisions. But yeah, that's interesting.
Absolutely. And we are actually, it's interesting. I'm really encouraging people to put more and more questions they have while we are speaking, and we will be answering them on the go. And one of the questions were like, if different software products, you were saying Bentley Systems and Autodesk Framework, but if there are different stakeholders using like Arcad or any other software like from Trimble, Structure, and so forth, how do you collaborate with them? Do you use Open BIM standards, or do you try to pull them more in the software side that you're accommodating it? Or can you just explain a little bit on that aspect?
That's a good question. I grew up from a BIM perspective in Europe, so speaking a lot about Open BIM and IFC and all those concepts. And then I moved to the US, and here in the US, a lot of my people have never heard of IFC. They don't know what is Open BIM, never heard. So I will be very frank here. When we have projects in an Autodesk environment, everyone is working with Revit and Civil 3D. So it makes my life easier in terms of BIM workflow. That's mainly for, again, the water sector, when we design, water facilities, water utilities. When I work with the infrastructure business line, so here with the Department of Transportation, so the entity who is managing the roads and the bridges and the tunnels in the US, they mostly work in either Bentley or Autodesk. And then the entire supply chain, so all the designers, contractors have to follow that approach, a bit like in the UK or in Australia. So I've never had any project where anyone came with Archicad or Trimble product. Never, in 3 years and a half, and we always use just the native files. And I've never had any client asking for any Open BIM approach. So that it is what it is, and again, here I'm not speaking for the private real estate sector in the US, because this is not a sector I'm part of and I'm working for. I'm really working for more the public sector because of the position of Arcadis in the market. And in the public sector, the digital maturity is maybe sometimes a bit behind compared to the private sector. So those clients will just sometimes ask for CAD deliverables, and sometimes I will see something in the RFP, in the proposal, they will ask for a Revit model. I'm like, oh wow, that's new. They ask for a Revit model, but that's never. I never had this IFC Open BIM questions and requests here in the US.
Yeah, actually, you have a right point over there, because we do work with a lot of US clients in the US market. And when we talk about the open BIM, they suddenly say, we get the same, like reaction. Why we need that, and why don't we just focus on, like in like a particular vendor? Wouldn't it be easier our job if we are already, like doing a change? What about if we just focus on that vendor and at least take it smoother? Yeah, I mean, there's a benefits, pros and cons for every aspect, but there's a culture. You're right, they are more towards like if they want the change, they would like to rather stick with a particular vendor and get it nailed, rather than like focusing like Europe more open BIM. And we discussed like how different vendors doesn't play a significant role in the industry, and actually they're all pushing for improvements. And again, this has a pros and cons, because in that way the vendor doesn't feel like I need to push my software further because I don't have competition. But on the other side, if it's open BIM, everyone is pushing forward, so because there's a huge competition going on, right?
I don't say that's a good approach or a bad approach. I just say that's different. And you asked the question about open BIM, and I would not lie. I haven't seen any request around open BIM in more than 3 years that I'm working here. That's what I've seen. At the same time, you know that, for example, a company like Autodesk is based in San Francisco in the US, and we all know that they are very good at marketing. They are good at that. I mean, their
They're
products are good, and
rocking.
they are good
They're
at that.
rocking.
And here we are in the land of Autodesk. So for me that makes a lot of sense. And again, I don't say it's good or bad. It's just different.
Absolutely. No, your perspective is totally understandable and makes sense, because that's why people are actually watching, our talks. They want to see different perspective from different peers, and that is really pushing us. Because one of the study that when I was like when I'm reading papers, it was saying in order to push BIM forward, what do we have to do? What is the most needed stuff? And most people voted for peer learning and peer like collaboration, because if your peers are collaborating, you're in a way first more motivated, and there is more of a like professionalism and knowledge going into it, so you can actually get to the learning curve much faster, and it doesn't become so steep. So coming to the point of view from the different cultures and all these aspects, let's talk a little bit about digital twins. So how the digital twins goes, and like do people really understand what digital twin is, and how Arcadis is playing a role on that? Froze, I think, for a second. So the connection froze, so there might be some connection issues, which might be from our side or from... Okay, sorry, Francois. Yes, we are back.
Back live? Okay,
yes.
I was about to say that, I have the feeling sometimes that the digital twin is the new cool, like BIM was maybe 10 years ago in the industry. And everyone has to speak about digital twin today to be up to speed, And in many papers and presentations I've seen is that sometimes you have a lot of very high level presentation around digital twin, but no one really knows what it is. So to give you a quick presentation, and we have developed some concepts in Arcadis too. I see BIM as being, you have BIM is still and it's not dynamic, it's like static. And the digital twin concept brings a dynamic layer on top of what you had in BIM. And again, BIM is not the only foundation for digital twin. It could be a GIS platform, it could be any other database type of model. As long as you have a database and object-oriented models, you have a foundation for what could be a digital twin. And then you add a layer of a dynamic data that will come from your physical asset, and that's why we speak about digital twin. And so that's why we have that combination of that object-oriented model plus some IoT technologies sometimes, and then you will have a digital twin. But that digital twin without any specific use case is completely useless. And I think that many people are completely forgetting the user experience part of the digital twin. You can have the best digital tool you want. If you don't know how to access it, and if you don't know what you're going to get as insights from it, no one is going to use it. Okay, so that's very important to bring the end user back into the center and to think about what we want to achieve. sometimes I see some companies developing some super complex digital twins where in fact maybe just a BIM model with a synchronization on a daily basis from data coming from some external sources would have been enough, and maybe that's not a digital twin, but that's enough, and that meets your clients, your users' needs. So sometimes I think that's important to take one step back to say and to ask ourselves, okay, what do we want to achieve? Being said, I think that digital twin and being able to bring a lot of data sources in one place will do play a big role in the future, especially for operation and maintenance. And we start to have some use cases where, yeah, we try to enhance our BIM models with this type of approaches. But I will say that we are not there yet. We have some first proof of concepts which are really interesting, popping up all around in the world, and not just within Arcadis, but within the entire industry, which is great. But there are still a lot of things to figure out in terms of technology, in terms of cloud-based data management. How do we do that? And I will say in terms of people, because what I see is that people able to create such platforms are still very rare within the industry. And I do not feel that the construction industry is great at attracting programmers and people with highly skilled in coding and programming. And I think the construction industry will miss that quite shortly. So my advice to you, if you like coding, you should think of the construction industry, because I think there will be a lot of job opportunities in the future around programming and coding, and maybe more than just basic engineer like me, because that's really what the construction industry needs today and what we need to move forward in the digital era.
Absolutely, and in a second we'll talk about advice from Francois about the career in BIM and what advices he can give, because most probably, as I said, he receives so many CVs and so many interviews with so many different colleagues and different stakeholders. But before that, you really nailed it. I mean, you really mentioned good points. You first said like about the programmers and the construction industry, and yeah, we are really missing AI, artificial intelligence, in our interest industry. We are still doing the same thing that we are doing, and slowly started changing to, like you saw that huge shift to Revit, and people are having a difficult to adopt. And if we have more like tools like Revit with AI, artificial intelligence, and more adaptation period, would be much more faster, because people doesn't have to so much really become expert in a tool, but rather derive just the logic and methodology into the tool. And another thing that you mentioned as well when you were saying about the digital twins, you mentioned that maybe some data or some information they create will not be really useful, and that is true, because you need to focus from different point of view before you even start anything, even BIM. Think about what value are you looking forward to get from here? What value it will give it to you? Critically ask this question to yourself. Criticize every single bit on your outcomes in order to be realistic. So you cannot be just Pollyanna and say, yeah, I will get everything from the BIM. Rather, really understand the value-driven approach and try to focus on the value. Then you will focus your energy bringing the most return on investment. So from the corporate side, how do you, when it comes to the, cultural aspects, how you are managing this, return on investment, code discussions and so forth? Can you, without going obviously the confidential level of detail, can you just tell us a little bit on that, on that bit?
Yeah, no, that's an important point, because again, I think that if you want to be successful in any digital transformation, it needs to come, both from top down and bottom up for sure. You need to have people on the ground interested in these new technologies, giving it a try, watching videos on YouTube and learning by themselves. You need that resource, and you need that those teams with this willingness to go there. At the same time, if you do not have the push and the money coming from the top to make that transformation happening, nothing will change, especially in big corporations. So I think that there is a lot of work to be done by communicating to the leadership to explain them why it's so important to move into transition into BIM. I often receive that feedback from the leadership is that, oh yeah, but my client is not asking for BIM. So why should we invest so much money in training our staff and changing our practice where my client doesn't even care? Like, yeah, but you see what's going on in the industry. You see that your client will end up asking for that, because this is not just a 2 year trend. It's been more than 10 years that the industry is moving into BIM. So your client, maybe it's not this year, maybe it's in 2023, but your client will end up asking for BIM. And if you are not able to deliver your project in a BIM environment, then even if you have the best designers and the best engineers in the world, you are out of business because you cannot meet these specific requirements of working in this environment. So I think there is a lot of work to provide, the leadership with a vision and showing them why it's important sometimes to disrupt ourselves first before being disrupted by the industry and by the client request. And then the return on investment and the business model is easy. Is either you are still in business or out of business. I mean, that's one or the other solution. What do you pick? So that's why at a company level, for example, within Arcadis, more than 3 years ago, we launched a big digital initiative, and maybe you have heard of that 100% BIM program we pushed for. That was like, okay, we want all of our projects to be done in BIM as soon as possible because we know that's the future. But to get the buy-in from the leadership to be able to launch such a project took a long time. It's been more than 5-6 years of research and showing them why we do that. Having proof of concept. You want to have some small pilot projects where you invest some money but not too much, and you bring that to the leadership, sometimes to some clients, and you start to see the feedback. And in many cases, the clients are super happy. They are like, oh, hey, that's great. Maybe they are not ready to pay for it now. Maybe they will never be ready to pay for it, but at least they will ask for it in the future. So if you're not able again to do it, then your competitors will do it for you. And
Absolutely.
You don't want that to happen. So that's a lot of taking one step back, asking the why and showing the added value and the different use cases. And remember, in BIM, if we just do BIM to deliver a 2D drawing from Revit at the end of the day, yeah, we will lose a lot of money. I can tell you, that's for sure.
Absolutely. After paying so much of the investment in software,
just to do 2D drawings, we'll be big losers at the end of the day. But if you really think of all those BIM uses and all the added value you can think of, and if you start to think of ways to monetize that, each of those BIM uses, all the added value you can get from your BIM model, from visualization to the different dimensions of BIM with 4D, 5D, things that the client didn't think of, but they might be interested in that. It could be the end client, it could be the contractor. For us as designers, the contractor is sometimes a client. It could be the operator. You could think of how to leverage BIM for asset management. So then there is value in those BIM models, because those BIM models are nothing more than a structured database. And a lot of operators are interested in having a structured database. So then what do you do to sell that? And again, here you think of the monetization aspect of BIM, which is not just, oh, I will deliver a cool 3D model. Cool. Yeah, that's more than that, hopefully.
Very well said. So in this case, I would like to also focus on this aspect when you were saying, like business side of the BIM. When you focus, as I previously mentioned, on the value-driven approach, the business really focuses on, okay, by investing these different dimensions and all these platforms, we can actually, even though the investor or the client, the public client didn't ask, or even the private client didn't ask for it, they suddenly see on their table more value. So you become in their eye more valuable as a business. Why? They wouldn't even now. It's not about asking to meet the expectations, but you're kind of over delivering. So in the next project, they will automatically consider you. In a second, we will talk about do's and don'ts and the BIM career advice. But take a moment, please subscribe to our channel. We have lots of BIM talks and a lot of practical approaches, methodologies, and different workflows that we are incorporating into our channel. So you will find it very useful into your career and your daily routine. So take a moment and subscribe and smash the like button if you already didn't. So let's discuss a bit on the BIM career. What kind of advices would you give to the audience or to the people on the career selections, maybe, or when they are submitting, like for a job application, or even when they are working, if they are what kind of mindset they should have. So we can discuss different levels.
Yeah, good point. I think in many cases people like the tools and those techniques and using Revit and all those things. I think that's super important, especially today when you come with a good tool background and a good skill level in Revit, for example, you are for sure valuable. But what we see and what I see when I receive all those resumes is that many people are very good at the tooling. And what we miss today is maybe the subject matter expertise. I mean, you are a Revit user, but your first role is not to be a Revit user, is to be an architect or to be a structural designer or to be an MEP expert or to be a process mechanical engineer. So keep that in mind. You don't want to forget that part of the construction industry, because having a Revit model but not knowing anything about how to build a building is completely again useless. It's like having a car with no gas. Okay, you have the car, that's great, you can sit in, but you cannot go anywhere because you don't know how to start. So I think that's very important for those maybe younger staff to remember that it's good to have those skill sets, but do not forget that at the end of the day, companies like us, we hire civil engineers, we hire structural engineers, and okay, we want them to know how to work in a BIM environment, how to be good with Revit, but we already hire engineers before hiring others. That's one thing. And I will say that the other thing is that if you like working in a BIM environment, really try your best to think the way the software has been designed. In many cases, I see people using a software, but they don't know, in fact, how to use it. And at the end of the day, in many of the projects I see, we just leverage 5% or 10% of what the software can do. And I often hear people telling me, oh, I cannot do that in BIM because of the technology or because of the platform, because it doesn't work. I'm like, no, it's because we don't know how to use the software the right way.
Very well said.
And and I think the technology, especially when it comes to BIM, maybe not digital twin because that's a bit more advanced and that's all those cloud platforms, but when it comes to BIM and Civil 3D and Revit and Open Roads, those software are very mature. They are very good. They are very powerful. And we just use 10% of it. And I will come back from my business perspective. On my contract with Autodesk, I pay 100% of the software, by the way. So if we just use 10% of it, we are losing something down the road. So please, if you like those things, really think about, go back into the software history and learn about it and learn why this software came and how it has been designed. And if you know how something has been designed, then you know how to use it. I will go back to my example of a car. If you stay in the first gear on the highway, the engine will break. That's the same thing with the softwares. You need to know how to use them, and please try to really take the most of it. And then if we see that during an interview, I will be super happy to say, yes, let's go there, because we want people who know how to leverage fully the technology which is available today.
Absolutely. And just adding to your addition to your metaphor, even though some cars can do 60 miles with the first gear, it's not the aim. It's not the aim, It is the aim is accelerate quickly and then put to the second gear. It's not the drive with the first gear. That's very well said. I mean, because
to add on that, BIM is not a sprint. BIM is a marathon, and BIM implementation and BIM project is a marathon. So even if you can get to 60 miles per hour in 1 minute, you need to last, and your car will not last, in first gear at 60 miles per hour for 1 year. So just keep that in mind.
No, it's very well said as well, because as you said, we can do methods to accelerate things depending on milestones and the project and the flow, but still it's a long-term thing. It's a marathon, like you mentioned. We need to be stably, constantly grow, constantly increase the miles, constantly increase the speed, so we can reach to a much more valuable approach. But what you said is really true, because I also see a lot of BIM authoring tools, regardless it's Arcad or Revit or so forth. They're either concentrating on the tool, they know the functions, and they think they know how to use a tool, but they don't really focus on process and understanding the really why this tool works in this way. Because when they understand the process and how this tool and why this tool really works in this way, they can start merging it analytically in their brain, and then they can find different and more innovative solutions. So for example, just to give you an idea, we are like, we have one type of projects and long-term contracts where before they tried different products. So they tried like SolidWorks, Inventors, and so like the more on the because it's manufacturing level. And then we brought it because we saw that the type of project you are doing is not fit for like creating buildings or creating prefabricated components for buildings, because things change and concept change and so forth. And then we brought it into Revit at a manufacturing level. I would say very little part of the industry is doing that kind of stuff, but we understand the process. So in 2 days, we were able to deliver shop drawings for the shop. So which is a significant improve. But again, how did we do this? We didn't just say this tool is not for fabrication. We understood what it is capable of and what it can really deliver value. And does this value match what we are looking for? Testing it, seeing that really it's valuable and it's fast, and then we just kept growing, and we came at a stage that it's like it's just let it go, and you will get the drawings. And in a second, we have just one question here about the procurement. So we will discuss procurement, and I will ask Francois about the procurement methods, and if the US industry is having issues with the type of contracts they are facing with to implement BIM, and then we will jump into do's and don'ts and his advice on that. So can you tell us a little bit about what kind of procurement methods and how you were pushing different procurement methods, or you didn't manage to push and you just kept traditional ways and it just worked fine?
Yeah, I think that in the sector and the projects I'm involved in, we are not there yet, and the client is not clear on the way to request for those BIM approach from a procurement perspective. As I told you, I see sometimes on the West Coast from some Californian clients, even in the public sector, the request of having a Revit model at the end of the design. So that's part of the contract. And then those models will be sent back to the contractors directly. So that's something I've seen in France also before moving. Something we start to see in some infrastructure projects as well. But unfortunately, I see too many projects and RFP, request for proposals, where the client just says, "Oh, I would like BIM on that project." I'm like, yeah, it's not really a proper way to procure BIM when you just ask for BIM without any information. Maybe here I'm a bit on the extreme side, and maybe they say, "Oh yeah, I want a 4D BIM with LOD 300," something that doesn't make any sense either. So
Absolutely.
that's where you see that we still have, at least in the public sector, a big gap to bridge when it comes to general awareness and understanding of what is BIM. So when I told you that I try to educate the most of our project managers in the company around what is BIM and the basic concepts of BIM, it's because at the end of the day, those people are in front of our clients, and we want those people to educate back our clients. So
Absolutely.
if our staff do not know what they are talking about when it comes to BIM, because of course they will say to a client, "Oh yeah, I know BIM," because you do not say no to your client. So of course they will say yes. Then they will start to say things that I disagree with. So we want to have this common message, and especially to help the entire industry. So I will say that in terms of procurement, what I have seen still today is very immature. We are not there yet compared to some contracts I've seen back in France when I was in Paris working for the Grand Metro project, the big new metro lines that will come before the Olympics in Paris. The procurement mechanism in terms of from a BIM approach was super well addressed and complex, and that was like a 60 pages document just presenting the BIM approach and the BIM requests. I've never seen that in the US. I haven't seen it yet. I would say I will stay in the optimist side of the spectrum. That will come, sure. But yeah.
I think it's not different when we talk about the private sector. I think it's the same thing. So they generally request, high level like 4D BIM, like you said, BIM. I want sustainability in BIM, but they don't really define, and it takes so much effort to tell them what do you really need it for, to boil it down the real value, because sometimes even they don't know what they need to. We need to dictate and we need to direct them to the right thing. So you need this because of this will add value to you. And this comes by experience and expertise involving a multitude of projects. And you can see, okay, BIM is very powerful in this type of projects. And we can, knowing you, this kind of client and this kind of project, we can really bring lots of benefit, and we can do the loop in a way that, we constantly learn and implement, and improve. So absolutely. And one of the questions that we were receiving in the chat, so it was like, so because we are just jumping in the Q&A session in a second, so in the meantime, before actually I answer this, would you like to mention do's and don'ts about yourself? So you just maybe tell us about what you think people should do in the industry, like few points, and they should not do in the industry.
Sure. Maybe the do is to start with the end in mind when it comes to BIM. So think about the value and what BIM uses you will implement. It can be overwhelming when you see all those BIM uses from the Penn State. I don't know if you know that document from the Penn State University describing all the what you can do with BIM. If you try to implement them all on your project, that will be too much. So just beginning with the end in mind, what do you want to achieve on each of the projects? And maybe that's one specific BIM use on this project, and that will be another on the other one. So do not try to boil the ocean. I would say use the right tool for the right thing, and that's something you just mentioned, Hassan. If you try to design a road with Revit, it will not work. Okay, that's and you can try as many times as you want. That will not work. So please take one step back and do not rush into modeling without thinking about what you're doing. I've seen many projects failing because there was no proper plan in place. We have those standard action plans in the company. We have some templates. People do not take the time to have a look at the main key points you want to check before starting, because they want to have some models, because that's cool to have a 3D model in BIM 360. Yeah, okay, that's cool. But if it's cool but useless, that's at the end that's useless from a business perspective. So do not rush to the modeling tool. Do think twice about what you're doing, and maybe ask questions to your client before starting anything. And maybe having a good day of
discussion
with the client will save a week down the road in terms of miscommunication. So I will say, do take your time. We know that the construction industry is already very slow, but I think that taking one more day before starting anything is okay. And at the end of the day, that will be for the benefit of everyone.
Absolutely. And one thing to add here, when you said, take a look at the what's the software capable of. Also test it, like do a minimal viable product. Do a small road. You don't have to do it a fancy road. Do a small road, and you will understand that it's not functional already. Do different techniques, research, and see, and then you see, okay, it doesn't work, and then you move on. Otherwise, like if you just try to boil the ocean, you can just try it entire year or entire decade, and then nothing will happen.
Yeah, fail fast. If you want to fail, that's okay, but fail fast.
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah. And what you said? And what about the other parts? So what to do's?
The what to do's, I would say, be open-minded. I think the digital movement in the construction industry goes very fast, so it takes a lot to stay up to speed. But I think that in touch with this type of podcast or discussions or blog post is very important, because the things are evolving so fast. And ask for, you cannot be up to speed to everything by yourself only. So that's why you need the entire BIM community or network to help you do that. So I will say, stay super open-minded. Maybe something that was very true 1 year ago is not is not that true today because of how fast the technology is moving, and those processes, are moving very fast too. So I do think that what we need to do is to be agile enough in our mind, in our standards, to just evolve like the digital industry and the digital movement is moving, and just be agile. See that, okay, something that was great a year ago is not great anymore. That's okay. That's how the work is today. Your old iPhone 4 does not work anymore. That was great some years ago. That doesn't work anymore. Is it good or bad? That's just a fact. So we have to stick to that fact of being agile and moving with the flow.
And we are coming back again to continuous improvement, right? So this closing this loop, saying if you need to have your standards, you need to have these policies in a closed loop. They should be living things. They should not be just set once and we made the BIM manual and just it's in the shelf now, it's staying there. And no, it has to be constantly updating. Then if it's hard to update 120-page manual, first place, don't do 120-page manual. Why you're doing, who will read this 200 or 120 pages, like the manual? So do what you really need, and maybe we break down the vertical section. Maybe you do like a wiki and you update things as you go, so you can do different methods. Just try to understand what will bring value. And one of the questions that we are seeing over here in the chat, so now it's a QA session, ask all your questions. We have a few minutes left with the Francois, so you can ask all the questions right now is the time. And I can see that. What about the BIM certifications? When you see people with BIM certifications, do you have a different perspective to them, or do they have extra value in front of applications and when they apply for a job?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, if you have a BIM certification in one specific software, that helps for sure. It shows a proof of, because sometimes people are overselling themselves, and that's not great. I can tell you, we see that quite fast on the project. So do not if you have certification, that's great. I know that there are certifications around BIM management now coming, from Building Smart. That's great too. I mean, I think that it shows that you have the basic knowledge of the vocabulary and the terminology coming from the ISO, 1965. That's super important to have that, because at least we have that common language, which is missing in many cases. So
Absolutely.
if there are any certification is always good. I will say, do not try to get all certifications, and having project experience and work experience is more important. But I know that sometimes it's hard to find a job in.
And even like BSI and all these BRE, BSI, there are different companies. They are delivering certifications. More than the certification, I think there's a misconception on that. There's nothing wrong. In my opinion, there's nothing wrong to get all the certification industry. But when if your approach is just to get the certification, it's wrong, as Francois said. But if your aim is to learn more and understand different aspects, understand maybe one little learning, one little lesson or something, it might just change your entire perspective. Yes, go ahead and try to learn more and invest in yourself, in your knowledge. But otherwise, if you're just going for certification, of course, no, it doesn't make sense. In that case, I mean, I don't think that even you need to ask this question, because you just go there to learn and take the courses that you can learn, not just for the certification solely. Because what happens if you just take the certification, you don't understand the system, or you don't BIM workflows and you cannot adapt? I mean, you will be fired after the first month, so it will not work.
Try to be interested in what you are learning, if you have some level of passion in addition to what just learning, purely learning, that will help. And we see that when we interview people who are really driven by what they do, that makes a big difference.
We have one more question. Is there a need for BIM coordinators or BIM managers in France?
In France?
Yeah.
I think everywhere. Not only in France, but I would say there is a need for good and experienced BIM coordinators and BIM managers, because those roles are really new to the industry. I know that sometimes some clients ask for a 10 years experienced BIM manager. I'm like, no one on earth has that, if you're really honest, managers. But remember, I think that need will end up disappearing maybe in 10 years. So again, be agile and be ready to have that construction industry knowledge so you can adapt your work and adapt what you do, continuously learn new things. So because BIM coordination will become, and BIM will become business as usual in some years, hopefully. That's the goal. In that
Absolutely.
case, the industry will not need BIM experts as today, as many of them. But there will be something new. So then be agile and learn those new things too.
Absolutely. But they will always need coordinator and managers. So this could be...
there will coordinators on projects, yes, and people who can work in BIM. Oh yeah, even better. So there will always be a need for BIM coordinators, that's for sure. And we need a lot of them today.
Absolutely. So, okay, I think these are all the questions. And maybe one last question that I can ask is how US industry is seeing ISO 19650. Is it is it being pushed in the industry? What's your perspective?
In my view, it's not pushed that much yet. I know that this is something my fellow BIM managers, we are talking about it, and we do our best to mention that there is an ISO standard that does exist. When I speak with clients, I mention them that there is a global ISO standard for BIM. So if they want to use something, they can just follow that. So I think that as we have more and more advisors like me speaking with clients and mentioning the ISO, that will come, but that takes a long time. Again, that's a marathon, maybe an ultra marathon, and that will come. But I haven't, again, in my perspective, and this is just me working on projects, I haven't seen any project where I was asked to follow the ISO 1965 in the US. But I do not lose faith. I still think that will come.
Yeah, I'm sure it will be pushed. It's the same. I have the same experience. They don't even know exactly what it is in some companies. Yeah. But I think we need to keep repeating, keep making this kind of videos, making this content. Again, if you didn't like and subscribe, this is the way to distribute and share. So share, and share. So share with the peers so they can learn more and more, so we can distribute these, these talks, these experiences to the entire industry to push the industry forward. Thank you very much Francois for today. I think your experience and your perspective was great. Would you like to have any final words?
Yeah, thanks for having me. I think that's great, and let's continue to share knowledge. I think that will help everyone at the end of the day.
Okay, so perfect. Thank you very much. So if you would like to learn more like BIM talks or other BIM talks, we talk about the standards, we talk about the retail information modeling, which is RIM, something different. We talk about the level of detail, level of information needs. So what is the distinguish between? So there are loads of BIM talks. There's a playlist. So check out in our channel. Or else, if you want to learn more practical aspects, we will also have a list of videos for you in the channel. So subscribe and watch all the videos.